Our next speaker has been the editor of her father's books for over 18 years. Now, can you imagine the unique experience she has had being raised by the motivator's motivator? It's given her an equally unique perspective about work and about life. And, she has shared the Get Motivated platform with her legendary father and motivational icon, Zig Ziglar, for several years before she became the incredible dynamic speaker and author that she is today. And we are just so thrilled to have her with us because together with her father, they have already changed the lives of millions of people around the globe. So please help me welcome to the stage Zig Ziglar's daughter, Julie Ziglar Norman.
And I need to tell you that I am a huge animal lover because one of the cool things about being my parents' daughter is they believe that if you let children have animals and let them take care of them, they would learn responsibility. And as long as we took care of them, we could have as many as we wanted. And I've had skunks and chipmunks and mice and rats, and I've even had raised raccoons, and you name it, if it's an animal, I've had it. When I was almost 10 years old, I had a little pet chipmunk named Chicker, and this is my representation of Chicker. Chicker wasn't much bigger than this, actually. That's a pretty good copy. And Chicker had a little chipmunk cage, and I was washing it. And for some reason, just like a kid, I decided that I would put this chipmunk in a shoebox, and then I put that shoebox on top of my mama's car that was in the carport. And I put it up there to keep the dogs and cats from messing around with it. And my daddy was out washing his car on the driveway. I was scrubbing away, and all of a sudden I heard this noise, pop, pop, pop. And I turned around just in time to see that lid fly off that shoebox. And all of a sudden, Chicker made a mad dash for freedom. And I started screaming, "Daddy, Daddy, Chicker's loose, she's loose, get her, Daddy, get her." And my dad stood up. He got tall, and this was before superheroes, but he looked like one. He got laser focused, and he zoned in on that chipmunk, and he took off right after her. And he chased her up a pine tree, and she jumped off right when he got there, and he chased her up the next one. I was right on their heels. "Daddy, get her, Daddy, don't let her get away." And folks, this was in the 60s. This was before Dad got slim and trim, so there was 220 pounds of big guy chasing 5 ounces of lickety-split, lightning-fast chipmunk. I can still see it. And they ran up to some more trees, and finally, we got lucky. Our next-door neighbor had left their louvered window open, and that little chipmunk ran right up the wall and attached herself to the screen inside that window. Daddy was able to reach in there and grab her. And that's when things got really exciting because Chicker stuck her 2 front teeth all the way through that fleshy part of Daddy's thumb. He started screaming, "Oh, she's biting me, give me something to put this chipmunk in." And I started running for the house, and he was hot on my heels, and I was yelling, Mama, get something to put the chipmunk in. It's biting Daddy." Well, she met us at the back door with a half-eaten box of vanilla wafers. And right before Daddy slung that chipmunk into that box, I couldn't help but notice the blood dripping off his elbow. But even more than that, I couldn't help but notice the grip he had on that chipmunk. If she had struggled to get away, she could not have gotten away. In many, many ways, I feel like God has had to hold on to me with that same grip that my father held onto that chipmunk. Now, I've got a couple of questions for you guys. And don't get all in a wad. They're not hard questions. I'll tell you in advance, the answer is either going to be a yes or a no. Have any of you ever had a naked man knock on your front door?
No.
Have any of you ever had your horse commandeered by the sheriff so that he could go look for car thieves and your cattle feeders?
No.
Well, since you answered no to both of those questions, you're probably not going to understand fully how I ended up with the vicious St. Bernard named Stanley Aloysius. But I'm going to tell you. That day that the naked man knocked on my front door, I lived way out in the country. I lived so far out in the country, we had to drive an hour into town to get groceries. As Daddy would say, we had to drive towards town to go hunting. That's how far out in the country we lived. My closest neighbor was 2 miles away. And I saw the dogs run around the side of the house, just barking, tails wagging, and I couldn't see what they were following. So I went to the side of the house and opened the side door, and just as the dogs ran to the front. And I peeked around the front, and there was a naked man going to knock on the door. So I ran in the house. I told my husband, I said, there's a naked man at the front door. He didn't believe me, but he shooed me back in the house, went and got his shotgun. The next thing I heard was, spread them and grab that tree. And so he did. Well, I'm glad to tell you that the poor guy had just been robbed, and they had kidnapped him, and they had taken all of his clothes thinking it would slow him down getting help, and they had dumped him on a little dirt road way behind our house, and we were the first place he came to. Well, it was less than 2 weeks later, I was out riding my horse in the lower field, when all of a sudden a cop car came driving up that dusty little dirt road, jumped out. He said, give me your horse. I'm commandeering your horse. He said, there are car thieves, and we think they may be in your cattle feeders. I mean, this was a big sheriff, and I was on a not great big horse in my little English saddle. So I was thinking, man, when he puts his foot in that stirrup, that saddle's going this way. But he got on that horse and took off. And there I was, standing all alone. And his cop car both doors were open. He grabbed his gun out the other side, and it was running. And I'm looking around thinking, man, if I was a car thief, I think I would kidnap me and take off. But eventually the sheriff came back and took his car, and then he and 3 of his deputies went up to our house to check out the barn. Well, those same dogs that were so glad to see the naked man were just all tails a-wagging, helping them look through the barn and everything else. And that's when I decided I needed me a real watchdog. So we went to the pound, and we found a 3-time loser. The dog had bitten 3 people, 3 times you're out. Well, we had signed papers saying we know this is a vicious dog and we'll be responsible for his behavior. So we got Stanley Aloysius out of jail. They took him out to the pickup and tied him in there for us. And you should have seen the slobber slinging from that dog's mouth when he was trying to bite my husband. Well, we got home. He couldn't get near the dog, so he had to park the pickup under a shade tree. And then when the dog needed food and water, I'd go up to one end, distract him. Oh, sorry, Walt. And next thing you know, my husband would run in with the water and food. We did that for 3 days before he was finally able to convince that dog to let him get close enough to untie him. So Stanley Aloysius, our vicious guard dog, was such a great guard dog, we had to keep him tied up to keep him from biting me. Well, one day my husband was gone. And all of a sudden, the most horrible thing happened. Stanley broke his rope, and he went immediately to the horse paddock and started chasing a yearling colt. We had that colt on consignment. We didn't own him, and I felt horrified at what might happen any minute. I knew if he didn't catch the colt, that he would at least run him through the fence. And it was just going to be bad news. And without thinking, I ran out there, and I started chasing. Eventually, I got hold of that rope. And I mean, Stanley weighed 150, I weighed about 100. And he skied me around there like I was behind a motorboat for about 3 minutes. All of a sudden he stopped, and he turned around, he looked at me, and I realized I had something on the end of that rope that I didn't want to have. And it was me or him. And out of my fear and out of the situation I found myself in, I did the only thing I could do. I got real big, and I stood up, and I started grabbing that rope, and I would pull it and jerk it, and I said, bad dog, bad dog. And I was walking up to him while I was pulling him, and pretty soon I could see his eyes looking off to the side. And then by the time I got him up to me, he rolled over on his back. And from that minute on, that dog was my dog. Now I'm here to tell you, sometimes your life's going to get so scary. It's going to get so scary, and it's going to get so out of control, and you're not going to know what to do. But I can tell you, all you need to do is grab that rope and straighten out your life and jerk it into place and take responsibility for your choices and your decisions, right or wrong. Own it. Own it. I'm going to talk about purpose because everyone who's here has a question at some time or other about what their real purpose is. And I used to worry a whole lot about that. And a pastor of mine told me, he said, Julie, people think they have to go take tests and they have to take profiles to figure out what it is they're supposed to be doing. He said, don't you think your God's big enough to put in front of you what it is He would have you do? You just have to be obedient. You have to be willing, and you have to be available to see the opportunity when it comes. And our opportunities to serve are many. And it's through serving that we can be and stay excited about life. You know, there's nothing like the servant's heart for keeping a person happy. My father talks a great deal about all of the studies where people who get self-absorbed get depressed, and the way out of that is to go out and do something for somebody else. The other day, Jim and I were talking. He said, I've figured out what the last freedom is. I said, what do you mean? He said, we have one last freedom that nobody can take away from us. He said, it doesn't matter if they wrongly throw us in jail. Doesn't matter if they beat you to a pulp. Even if they come and they kidnap your family and take them away. The one thing they can't take away from us, the one freedom we'll always have, is to choose how we respond, to choose our attitude towards our circumstances. I just need you to know that my daddy has always believed that to get good stuff out of your mind, you have to put good stuff into your mind. And I know y'all know that. But I bet you don't know how he put good stuff into my mind, and I'm going to tell you. Sometimes in the morning, I'd wake up and I'd hear Daddy whispering in my ear, little one, you're going to have the most wonderful day. Your friends are going to be so happy to see you. You're going to make straight A's. You're going to have a cheerful, happy attitude. It's going to be great. And folks, when you're kind of an awkward preteen, you have to admit, that's a little creepy. Little creepy. But I love it that I have a father who loved me enough to make sure that he did the things for me that he believed in. Have you ever been in a restaurant where the waitress or the waiter acted like they were doing you a huge favor to wait on them? Has that happened to any of you? Well, one day I was about 6 years old and we were eating at a restaurant, and this lady, she just slammed our food down on the table. When she poured our tea, she sloshed it all over. And when she left, Daddy motioned for all of us to lean in, and in a real quiet voice, he said, obviously, something's bad has happened with this lady. She's having a real problem. He said, let's just see if we can be extra, extra nice to her and make her day better. That was how my daddy began to teach me that compassion and kindness was always the way to go. How many of you have listened to so many of my dad's tapes and CDs that when you come, say, to a Go Light, you hear his voice in your head about being patient? You come across circumstances that Dad's talked about and you remember the lesson he taught? Well, his voice is in my head like that. And one day I was on my way to have lunch with Mom and Dad, and I live in a town that's so small that even the squirrels don't get run over. They walk across the street. They don't dart in and out. You know, we don't run over them because we can get around them. And that little town of 1,000, we got lucky. We got a bypass around our city so the big old trucks don't have to go right through town. And one day I was on my way to their house, and I was going over the overpass, and here came a little bitty Jack Russell
little orange and white one just trotting across that bridge. If you ever seen a Jack Russell, you know how they are. They're just real quick. So I waited because it was just a 2-lane bridge and I didn't want to scare it. And all of a sudden, an 18-wheeler turned onto that road right up behind that little dog. She took one look over her shoulder, trotted over the side, and jumped over the concrete railing. 18 feet to the highway below. I was shocked. I pulled over to the side of the service road. I jumped out of the car. I ran down the embankment, scared to death she had landed in the oncoming traffic. But there she was on the shoulder of the road, just shaking. And I could see something was wrong with her paw. But I could also see she had on a collar that had a phone number. I was in luck. I picked her up. Unfortunately, she didn't bite me. Took her to the car. Quick, grabbed my glasses and my cell phone and dialed the number. A lady answered. I said, "You don't know me, but your little dog just jumped off the bridge at 1655. She's hurt. Where can I bring her?" She said, "I don't have a dog." I said, "Well, why is your phone number on her tag?" She said, "That used to be my dog." I said, "Well, what do you want me to do with this dog?" She said, "I don't know what to tell you to do with that dog." Then with all the self-righteous indignation I could muster up, I said, "Well, obviously you don't deserve to own a dog," and I hung up. Yep, I hung up. And that little dog and I drove down to the veterinarian's office. I dropped her off. I said, "Fix her up. I'll check on her when I get back, and we'll figure out what to do then." Got in the car. Oh, there's Daddy. "Little one, who are you to judge that lady? You don't know what's going on in her life. You need to call her. You need to call her right now and apologize." And I ignored him all the way to Dallas. I didn't hear his voice again the whole time through lunch, but when I got back in that car to head home, there he was. "Little one, I don't know who you think you are, but you owe that lady a call." I said, "All right, Daddy," and I pulled over and I dialed the number, and she answered. I was afraid she wouldn't. You know how that caller ID is. I said, "Please don't hang up on me." I said, "I'm the lady who called you about the dog earlier. And I have to apologize. I am so sorry. I don't know you. I don't have a clue what's going on in your life. I had no right to judge you. Can you forgive me?" She said, "I'm so glad you called me. All day long I've been thinking what a jerk you must think I am." She said, "When you called me, I had a car full of little boys who had spent the night with my son. She said, my son was born with a chronic health condition, and when it flares up, I have to rush him to the hospital. She said, that's what I was doing when you called, and I just could not think what I could do for that little bitty dog." Folks, what I was going to put on that poor woman's plate that was already full, because I just didn't understand what was going on in her life. And then she told me, "You know, that little Rosie dog is an escape artist." Escape artist. She said, "We gave that dog to the No Kill Humane Society. And we told them, don't give that dog to anybody who doesn't live in the country, because she's going to get run over if she stays here in town." And they followed her instructions, because I live in the country. But she had done all she could do as a responsible dog owner to take care of that dog. And I had thrown her under the bus. But because my father started teaching me at a very young age that you need to be kind and have compassion, I was able to go back and right that wrong and not leave that lady with a bigger burden than she already had.